How goes it? It's Matt here. I hope you're doing well. And today, I want to talk about what I consider is one of the greatest films ever made. And it was inspired by a place in South Wales called Port Talbot. But before we get there, let's have a tiny bit of an update, yeah? I haven't spoken to you in like 2 weeks, I think it is. And it's because last week, I did something really exciting, which going forward, I'm going to do more of, and hopefully in the future, I can kind of get around a bit and maybe do a live performance up by where you are. I opened for a band. It was a guy who was a poet who now performs in front of a band called Anthony Smerick. And I chucked him a DM and he gave me an opportunity to go up there and do a half-hour set before he went on. It was in a club called Club Ivo Bach in Cardiff. Legendary venue for the city. And it was absolutely class meeting Anthony. I'd met him once in Hay Festival when I was there in the queue. I got him to sign a book of his that I'd bought. And we had a quick chat about doing poetry in places where people don't want it, you know. I've done a lot of poetry in comedy nights where people do not want me there. And I've got to do the hard graft to kind of win them over. So I turn up to a comedy night and there'd be like someone's dad at the back. And he hears poet and he rolls his eyes. But by the end, I won that dad at the back, the hardest person in the room to win over. I often get him coming up to me going, oh, you know what, I don't normally like poetry, but that was okay. I'm just coming off the end of another illness. I think I got it from that gig. There were so many people who were lovely. I shook so many people's hands and talked to so many people. It was lush. So that is the plan going forward. Get in front of bands more than kind of comedy nights in general. Because I think it brings a really good vibe to the evening. With a band, you can kind of chill. There's a bit of active listening, but also, you know what it's like seeing a band. You kind of have a laugh with friends at the same time. It isn't quite as like you're not stuck to a chair in like a theatre. And then you get that bit with me where it's more active listening, but you're still all stood up so you can kind of wander around. And then back to a band for the end of the night. It's banging. But I performed a poem there that night that I wrote last year, but I've never performed live. So I thought I'd read that for you here right now. It's one about a health issue a lot of women go through called endometriosis. And like many health issues, doctors will default to a list of set things. You know, you turn up to the doctors saying, I've got some issue, and quite a lot of the time they default to things that aren't even related. You could be misdiagnosed for ages. And especially with endometriosis, the way that doctors just don't believe that most people have it, but 1 in 10 women has it. So I wrote a poem from the perspective of a doctor. It's called Things the Doctor Might Diagnose You With Before Endometriosis. Halitosis, deep vein thrombosis, a curious case of chronic hypnosis. A proper psycho, a massive typo, maybe it's just your usual menstrual cycle. Consumption up the junction, pathological liar is my assumption. You could be about to spontaneously combust. Have you ever considered you're a little bit nuts? I've just about had enough, so I'll prescribe you with a dose of good luck. And it's an awful situation, but sometimes I find just attacking things in a slightly different way. And it is fucking awful. It's awful for so many people. And now what I want to talk about today is I want to go from here in Cardiff and travel down the M4 towards West Wales and stop just before you get to Swansea, to a place that many of you know. It's got a sort of infamous reputation. As you're driving down the M4, and when you leave kind of Cardiff, coming up near Bridgend, it kind of turns into more farmland, more green. And then all of a sudden, out of the horizon, as you turn a corner on the M4, steel structures erupt out of a place called Aberavon Beach. You might know Port Talbot. It's huge, smoky steelworks, and they've gone through a lot of changes. It's been loads of political stuff. They've been kind of hung out to dry, the people there. It's been an industry town for decades and decades, all built up around the steelworks there. And the UK government recently saved another steelworks. I think it was Scunthorpe, something along those lines. But Port Talbot, they left hang out to dry. Loads of people recently lost their jobs. It was awful. And people start to build up stereotypes of the people who were there. Hard people. Tough people. And they also think about the art those people consume. You go places and you think of a bit like a place like that, and stereotypes might think, oh, they're not into art. They're not into cultural things. They're a bit of a backwater, you know? But no. Port Talbot, there's something fucking magic about that place. I can't completely put my finger on it. I'm not going to lie. But the amount of art that has come from that small place is mental. For actors, you've got Michael Sheen and Richard Byrne. For culture, you've got the Talbot Rugby Club, which has been holding this Christmas panto for years and years and years. It's legendary. There's artists, musicians, bars like Avon Ales, these places that are cultural hubs, and I don't know what it is, but it really punches above its weight. I go to a poetry night there. It's kind of my local poetry night, for lack of a better word. It's called the Drunk Poets Society. And the bloke who runs it, or is there the MC there, is a bloke called James Lilly, and he's a bare knuckle boxer. And before people get up on stage, he'll say to the crowd, anyone take the piss and I'll knock your fucking head off. Now, if you ever wanted to pour your heart out on stage, what a man to have your back. It's absolutely belting, and the people there are lush. Over 10 years ago now, I've got this book right in front of me, right? Michael Sheen went to Port Talbot when he had moved away. And over a few days, the whole town became a theatre. And they did The Passion of the Christ. They did The Passion as a play where Michael Sheen played as Jesus. The whole town became the crowds that were around him as he was getting ready to be crucified. They played out over days the actual Passion over Easter. It was incredible. You can watch, if you go online, I'm pretty sure there's a documentary of it on YouTube that someone's uploaded. And in front of me, I'm quite lucky enough that the photographer who did all the photography for that time released a book, and I've got hold of a copy of it. And it makes Port Talbot feel biblical. And do you know what I mean about that, though? Rather than the kind of suburbs that are sort of dead, there's some sort of living part to heavy industry. You've got proper nature, you know, out, not where farmland is. That's heavily industrialized in one way. But you go out into nature, into forests where you can walk and see the ferns lining the ground, wherever the trees break. And you see these places, and that's one part where magic sort of happens. And I think the other place where magic sort of happens is these heavily industrialized places. Places where people are thrown together. Places where there's the great theatre of humankind rising, changing the landscape of the earth. And I think that magic in those tough conditions can really harbour. Art can flourish because the world feels tangible. The world feels electric in those places. Because Port Talbot actually inspired one of the greatest satires of the modern world. Terry Gilliam, you might know who he is. He's the Yank from Monty Python. He went on to become a director. He did Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Time Bandits, Baron Munchausen. Oh, I'm forgetting some bangers. But he had this film, and it's called Brazil because it's named after a song that plays in the film, which is completely inspired by poor Talbot. Now, Terry Gilliam had written this satire on British life, on the modern world, on bureaucracy. It's truly one of the best films I've ever seen. It follows a man called Sam, and where Terry Gilliam got his inspiration from, even though he had written the script, but then took the leap, was he was stood on Aberavon Beach, which is the beach on the front of Port Talbot that looks over to Swansea Bay. And he stood on this beach, and at the time, coal was being brought down to help power the power plant. And from that, dust that just washes up on the beach. It was like the beach was black. And he's looking through the fumes, because if you know anything, they're modernising it now, but Port Talbot always had these fumes coming from the steelworks. And he stood on a beach that shouldn't be black, but it is, looking out in the polluted sunset. And he had a vision of a man stood on a beach like this, but has a little tiny portable radio and listens to beautiful, romantic, Latin music. And that kick-started him into pushing to get this film made. And this film is stunning. It follows a bloke called Sam. It's got so many famous people in. Let me get the list of actors. You'll know loads of these people. Jonathan Pryce is the main character. Robert De Niro's in it. Kim Greist is in it. Michael Palin is in it. Bob Hoskins is in it. Catherine Hellman is in it. Nigel Planer is in it. It's packed full of people who are incredible, often comedic actors, so this satire hits hard. It follows a man called Sam, and I want you to picture Port Talbot. Imagine living there during the really, really heavy industrial times. And I want you to think about looking out at the sunset from the beach, listening to Latin kind of salsa music. As you're looking through the pollution at that sunset, yeah. So Sam lives in a world which is incredibly modern. His mum is getting these like kind of crazy facelifts where the doctor is pinning back her skin from her face with clips. He has a role which is just full of bureaucracy. His boss is incompetent. Everyone's just watching stuff on TVs rather than bothering working. And Sam dreams. He dreams of a woman. But not only that, he dreams of something beautiful beyond the world he's stuck in. A world that's oppressed with bureaucracy. A lot of the through line of the film is following an error that's happened. And instead of anyone actually sorting the error out, they all work out how to blame another part of the system. They all want to blame another department, you know. So they're all handing it back and forth to each other. Everyone's constantly coming up with an excuse so they can hand it back to someone else. And the tragedy is that at the beginning, someone's died. And because they've died through this mistake, rather than rectifying it, which Sam wants to do, he wants to do the human thing. The system just wants to not have any responsibility. So through his dreams, dreaming of a better place, a better world, dreaming of human contact rather than just being overwhelmed by this system, Sam navigates this world. And I think the one bit that always reminds me of Port Talbot in terms of almost like in the film, it feels like they got from there, but it's much more beautiful Port Talbot than this. There's this bit where they're driving in a truck up a highway and there's billboards either side completely covering the landscape with all beautiful visions of different tropical places and products that will make you younger and this, that and the other. But it pans up and everything behind the billboards that surround the road is a is just a barren landscape, like a hellhole. And you just see the city rising in the distance. And that's the only bit that reminds me of Port Talbot. The environment around Port Talbot is actually beautiful. But when you're driving toward it from Cardiff way, all of a sudden it's quite flat. It opens up and it's quite flat apart from Port Talbot. And it reminded me of that same shot. But it made me think about dreaming about things. And I wrote this poem. It's quite a funny little one, so I wanted to do it today. Have you ever dreamt about... I had this dream about being an urban legend, becoming one. I was out last week. I was going for like a lunchtime walk, and in Cardiff, if you're anywhere in the UK, you might be having these. They're quite far north now. Ring-necked parrots. Now, ring-necked parrots, they're green with big red beaks. They've been in the UK for like 40, 50 years now. No, a bit longer than that. They've been in London for a very long time, but the last about 5 years, they've really spread, especially in Cardiff. One used to sit in my back garden when we had a budgie, and the budgie would respond to other birds, but it's a parrot. So when this parrot started making noises, it would wind the budgie up. So it would wind the budgie up and then just bugger off. Now, there's an urban legend about these parrots. That Jimi Hendrix released the first ring-necked parrots in the UK. And I went, more than being like a poet people know, more than being famous, imagine being an urban legend. And that's what I want to be. So this is called Urban Legend. Jimi Hendrix let the first ring-necked parakeets free in the UK. They say. There are alligators in the New York sewers. They say. The greatest artists die at 27. They say. It was a poet with a bus full of pensioners drove straight off Kevin Coyd Viaduct. They'll say. That one's a bit nasty. Oh, God. I did enjoy writing that one. But that film, Brazil, it reminded me... Sam is... Everything about his world is, like, intense. There's always stuff going on. It reminds me of the screens we have now. But this was filmed in the 80s, so they didn't have, like, phones. But... There's a screen everywhere. Everyone's looking at these screens all the time. There's always distractions. There's always a billboard. There's always a bureaucratic thing that's trying to hold up, trying to obfuscate responsibility as much as possible. And that world that Terry Gilliam had made, there's a mad bit where they actually film part of the film inside a cooling tower. Like those ones for nuclear reactors. Absolutely mad. The film looks stunning. But it did make me think about one thing. I got a bit of a mantra this year. I've been reading a lot. I posted a review of a book on my YouTube channel. A book called Roadside Picnic. And I think we might talk about it in future. Because it inspired a film called Stalker. It's a whole thing. You don't have to worry about that right now. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. But I've got a mantra. I've read 2 books this year so far, and I'm currently reading another one. This mantra is, be more bored. I look at this film, Brazil, and all the noise all the time, and I think, be more bored. Because being more bored lets you dream. It lets your mind's eye wander. Which is what I want to do more. And I've been writing more because I've been more bored. And this film, Brazil, inspired this. We got so many distractions all the time. If you ever just sat in a room and just not listened to anything, I feel like I used to do that all the time. But not anymore. So this is a poem that I'm going to leave you with. And it's a bit of a mantra going forward, right? You can take it if you want to, you don't have to. But I've got this fucking mantra because I think it's helped. And it's just be more bored. Yeah? And this poem is called Ever Remember Being Bored? Ever remember what it's like to be bored? Like actually fucking bored? Ever remember taking a shit and looking beyond your phone at the scars on your knees that were there before the hairs? Seeing their colour mellow over the years, stare into the stitch marks till your knees disappear? Ever remember lying on your back, staring into the sky, watching the clouds till your eyes and body start to sting? You think you're one with nature, but you've parked your ass on an anthill and they're crawling in crevices and biting in places you only show your doctor. Ever remember sitting in a room and listening to the floorboards creak? The rodents crawling in cavity walls, the fridge making that sound like someone's breaking into your fucking house. Ever remember being bored? I don't either. So yeah, this week, what I say is this. Be more bored and watch that film Brazil. Honestly, go off and watch it. Talking about not being bored though, the Six Nations starts this week. If you're not into rugby, you won't care. Wales are probably going to get battered, but it's going to be fucking good. So I'm excited for that. And yeah, I'm going to get over this cold because I've had a stuffed nose this whole time, which you've probably heard. And I didn't realise till I tried to talk on this that my lungs are also not at full capacity. I can normally quite project into this a little bit, but instead I'm kind of sat back a little bit more in my voice. So I hope I haven't been unbearable to listen to. I hope you have a good week, because the nights are getting a little bit longer now, aren't they? And it's nice. So I've been Matt Nobby, and we'll speak soon, yeah? Happy days. Ta-da.